Hola Bio. Okay, so yesterday's screencast was on the structure of the heart and how the heart pumps blood through itself, where the blood is coming from and where it's going to, and then how the heart pumps itself. And today's screencast is going to be about the circulation of that blood around the body. And there are actually 3 different circulatory loops that we're going to be covering today, so get ready. I'm just going to scoot down here a little bit. And so to start off, I'm just going to draw a schematic of the heart. Now I know you all know that hearts don't really look like this, but this will just make it easier. Okay, so here's our heart, and it is pumping blood, and it's a loop, so you can really start anywhere, but let's start with the pulmonary loop. So to start out, the heart is pumping blood from the heart itself to the lungs, and this blood is going away from the heart, so it's being pumped by it is in an artery, but remember this blood is deoxygenated because it's going to the lungs to be oxygenated. So, and these are called the pulmonary arteries, and they're the only deoxygenated arteries. They're the only arteries that carry deoxygenated blood in the body. The rest carry oxygenated blood. So I'm going to label them here. And then they carry this blood to the lungs, which, okay, the lungs, so you have 2 sets of lungs, and one set of lungs has 2 lobes, and the other has 3. They kind of look like baguettes in my drawing. They don't actually look like baguettes, but there you go. So here are the lungs, and the blood is pumped from the heart, it's deoxygenated, it travels to the lungs, and here it's going to unload its CO2, and it's going to pick up its O2. And this is just going to happen through diffusion. CO2 is going to go from an area of high concentration, which is within the blood, to low, which is in the airspace in the lungs, and oxygen is going to do the same, but in the opposite direction. It goes from an area of high concentration in the lungs to low concentration in the blood. And so when the blood comes back out of the lungs, it has picked up oxygen, and so therefore we're going to draw it as red. And remember, these are the pulmonary veins right here. And they are the only oxygenated veins in the body. Okay, so this loop is called the pulmonary loop. There you go. Okay, pulmonary loop. The second loop is after this blood comes back in to the heart, here, the heart pumps it out from the heart through an artery called the aorta to the rest of the body. So this blood here is going to be circulated all around your body. It's going to go to your brain, it's going to go to your fingers and your toes and your butt and your knees and really everywhere in the body. So all this blood is going to be delivered to the tissues of your body, where it's going to go down into little capillaries where the same thing is going to happen that happened in the lungs. We have this gas exchange taking place, except it's going to be the opposite. So at this point, right here, we have really high concentration of oxygen in the blood and low concentrations of CO2. So oxygen is going to leave the blood and travel to the tissues where cellular respiration is happening, and it's going to be used at the end of the electron transport chain. It's going to pick up 2 electrons and bind with some hydrogen and create water. And then CO2 from the Krebs steps and the Krebs cycle is going to enter the blood, and the blood that returns to the heart here is now deoxygenated, and it is CO2 rich. And it's going to return to the heart through the vena cava. And remember, there's an inferior and superior vena cava that dump blood back into the right atrium of the heart. Okay, so these are the two circulation loops that are pretty obvious. Oh, I should give this a name. This is the systemic loop. So it's delivering blood to your entire system. Okay, and the last loop is a little bit less obvious than the systemic loop, but it's also delivering oxygen-rich blood out of the heart, but it's delivering it to the heart itself. This is kind of a tricky concept to wrap your brain around, but the heart itself is a muscle, and because it's a muscle, it's undergoing cellular respiration to make ATP to allow it to do the contractions that it does, so it needs oxygen. And it also, again, is doing cellular respiration, so it's releasing CO2, so it needs to get away to have oxygen delivered to it and CO2 released from it, which goes back to the inside of the heart. So the heart is actually delivering blood to arteries that surround the heart itself. And these are called coronary arteries. And they surround the heart, and they're delivering to it the blood supply that it needs. And then, surprise, surprise, coronary veins deliver the blood back to the heart. So the heart is not picking up oxygen from the blood that's within it. Again, kind of a tricky concept to wrap your mind around, but instead it has its own loop that delivers blood to it. So it has arteries and veins all across it and within it, but not within the chambers that it's pumping. So this is called the cardiac loop. Okay, and then that's very nice. Fits nicely into one screen. Love that. Okay, there are 3 places where this can go awry. So the first thing I want to talk about is, I guess, pulmonary embolism. And I'm actually going to take this and move this over here. Can we change the color? Okay, so pulmonary embolism, change the color. This is when there's a blockage in one or more of the pulmonary arteries. And as you can imagine, this can cause a problem for the body because not as much blood is moving through the lungs because a bunch of these pulmonary, or one or multiple of these, are blocked, and so blood is restricted in where it can go. And this results in, well, a lot of things. Oftentimes increased rates of ventilation, so people's breathing rates will be increased, and then it also puts more pressure on the heart. It's like when you take a hose and you kink it, the water that gets out is moving through at a much higher pressure. It's much harder to pump through that restricted space. Well, the same thing happens to the heart. It's harder for the heart to pump to the lungs, and so heart rate will often go up really high. And pulmonary embolisms can kill people. And again, they're caused by a clot in the pulmonary artery. Okay, so that's the first type of blockage. The second type of blockage that we're going to talk about is called a stroke. I'm sure you all have heard that word before. Okay, and a stroke is caused by a blood clot specifically that's happening somewhere within the brain. And a stroke is very bad, again, or can be very bad, because it cuts off blood supply to a part of the brain. So depending on where the stroke happens in the brain, it can debilitate people in different ways. but essentially it's going to lead to tissue death in whatever structure that artery is supplying blood to. So stroke is another blockage, or is the result of a blockage in the systemic loop, specifically the brain. And the last type of blockage is a heart attack. And now heart attack is a very general term that we use to describe all sorts of problems in the heart. But one of the things that a heart attack can be is a blockage of one of the coronary arteries. So, when the coronary arteries, one or both of them, are blocked, then the heart tissue is no longer receiving this oxygen-rich blood in certain areas of it, and certain pieces of the tissue will die off. And this is a big problem because this means that the heart can stop beating normally or beating at all. So all three of these different types of blockages in the circulatory system are potentially really bad and can be fatal. Okay, so to end on that happy note, the good news is that it all fits into one nice little diagram at the end. Okay, I think this is relatively short, which is good. See you all tomorrow in class.